How does a global giant go from cultural dominance to staring at its first annual loss in more than 30 years? This is the story of how Adidas built a modern empire around a single phenomenon, and what happened when that phenomenon suddenly exploded in its hands. To understand how close Adidas came to disaster, you have to go back to the deal itself. Adidas partnered with Kanye West in 2013 after pulling him away from Nike. And over time, Yeezy became far more than a celebrity sneaker line. It became a cultural weapon. It gave Adidas relevance in the United States, lifted its profile in fashion, and created a product that consumers were willing to line up for, resell, and obsess over. Analysts later estimated that in its best years, Yeezy accounted for as much as 7% of Adidas sales, which is an extraordinary number for a business tied so closely to one name. That dependence mattered because Yeezy was not just big, it was disproportionately important. In 2022, Adidas generated more than 1.2 billion euros in Yeezy revenue. And when the company later modeled what would happen if it stopped selling the remaining inventory, it said the hit could lower revenue in 2023 by around 1.2 billion euros and cut operating profit by about 500 million euros. That tells you everything. This was no side project. Yeezy had become part of the financial engine. That's what makes this story so dangerous. When a company gets addicted to one growth machine, especially one it does not fully control, success can hide risk. And by the early 2020s, Adidas already had enough problems. Growth had slowed. North America had become tougher. China was weak. Inventory was building. The company was still carrying the scars of older strategic mistakes, including the Reebok acquisition, which Adidas bought for about $3.8 billion and eventually sold off after years of underperformance. So when the Yeezy crisis hit, Adidas was not walking into it from a position of strength. It was walking into it already off balance. The first real cracks were visible before the breakup. Adidas had already come under pressure as Ye publicly criticized the company and accused it of copying his ideas. On October 6, 2022, Adidas said the partnership was under review. At that moment, the company was trying to buy time. But the longer the uncertainty dragged on, the worse the exposure looked. Every day, the question got bigger. Could Adidas really keep one of its most profitable businesses alive if the person behind it had become a reputational threat to the brand itself? Then came the point of no return. On October 25, 2022, Adidas terminated the partnership after Ye's anti-Semitic remarks. On paper, that was the morally necessary decision. In business terms, it was like pulling the plug on a revenue stream the company had spent nearly a decade building. Production stopped. Sales halted, and the company was suddenly left staring at a mountain of product it could no longer treat like normal inventory. The timing made it even worse. The breakup landed just before the all-important holiday season. Reuters reported that the split cost Adidas 600 million euros in the fourth quarter of 2022 sales alone. Then came the next shock. Management warned that simply not selling the existing Yeezy stock would knock about 1.2 billion euros off 2023 revenue and 500 million euros off operating profit. If the company had to write the stock off entirely, Adidas said the damage could produce a loss of around 700 million euros. This wasn't a PR problem anymore, it was a balance sheet crisis, and the market understood that immediately. In February 2023, Adidas shares fell sharply after the company issued grim guidance, warning it could post its first annual loss in roughly 3 decades. Analysts called the outlook horrible. Jefferies cut the stock to hold, and Moody's downgraded Adidas' long-term issuer rating to A3 from A2, while keeping a negative outlook. In other words, the street was no longer asking whether Yeezy mattered. It was asking whether Adidas had built too much of its business on something that could vanish overnight. This is the moment where the title really comes alive. The deal that nearly broke Adidas was not the signing itself. It was the strategic trap hidden inside the success. For years, Yeezy had looked like genius. It gave Adidas cultural heat that traditional performance marketing could not manufacture. It helped the brand compete more aggressively in North America. It delivered premium pricing. And it added momentum at a time when sneaker culture and celebrity influence were blending into one giant global marketplace. As long as the machine kept running, it looked visionary. But that is the danger with concentrated success. You do not notice the fragility until the concentration is exposed. Once Yeezy disappeared, Adidas was not just losing a shoe. It was losing margin, traffic, conversation, and a huge chunk of narrative power. Suddenly, warehouses were full of product that could not be handled like ordinary stock. The company later said the unsold Yeezy inventory was worth about 1.2 billion euros. Think about that. Over €1 billion worth of shoes sitting there, frozen between financial necessity and reputational risk. Sell them, and Adidas would face backlash. Do not sell them, and the numbers could collapse. Either choice hurt. This is where most crisis stories become simple. Cut the product, take the hit, move on. But Adidas didn't really have that luxury. The company had to find a way to survive the break without turning the inventory into a dead asset. So instead of immediately writing off most of the stock, Adidas made a controversial but pragmatic choice. It would sell down the remaining Yeezy inventory in controlled drops and donate part of the proceeds to groups fighting anti-Semitism and racism. The first sales began in May 2023. Financially, it bought Adidas breathing room. Reputationally, it remained a tightrope walk. The numbers show why they did it. In 2023, the Yeezy sell-down generated around 750 million euros in revenue and roughly 300 million euros in profit, according to Adidas and Reuters reporting at the time. That did not erase the crisis, but it helped prevent a much uglier outcome. By January 2024, Adidas said it had decided not to write off most of the remaining Yeezy inventory for around 300 million euros after all, and would instead aim to sell the rest at least at cost. This was not a triumphant strategy. It was emergency management. But emergency management was exactly what the company needed. There was another problem, though. Even if Adidas successfully cleared the inventory, that still wouldn't solve the bigger question. What replaces Yeezy? A business cannot build a future by liquidating its past. And that is where the real turnaround begins. In 2023, Adidas reported a net loss of 58 million euros, its first annual loss in more than 30 years. Operating profit came in at 268 million euros, far better than the worst-case scenarios management had floated earlier in the crisis, but still massively below the company's historical standard. North America was especially weak, and the loss of Yeezy was a clear drag on comparisons. The business had survived the immediate financial detonation, but it still looked bruised, unstable, and exposed. This is where Bjørn Gulden matters. Gulden took over as chief executive at the start of 2023 and treated that year as a reset. Adidas's own reporting described 2023 as a transition year and a successful restart. Gulden focused on cutting inventories, rebuilding relationships with wholesalers, leaning into products that already had traction, and speeding up the company's ability to react to demand. That might sound operational, but in a turnaround, operational is everything. When a company has lost momentum, faster product cycles and better shelf space are not details. They are survival tools. And then Adidas found its next wave, not through another celebrity supernova, but through the classics it already owned. Samba, Gazelle, terrace styles, low-profile retro sneakers. By late 2023, Reuters was reporting that demand for Samba far outstripped supply. In early 2024, Adidas said strong growth was being driven in part by Samba and Gazelle, especially in Europe, while analysts said the turnaround had much more to do with Adidas brand momentum than the mechanics of Yeezy sell-offs. That is the critical emotional turn in the story. Adidas stopped asking how to survive without Yeezy and started proving it could win without it. By mid-2024, the numbers were no longer just stabilizing. They were improving fast. In April 2024, Adidas raised its guidance after a stronger-than-expected first quarter. By July, it lifted projected 2024 operating profit to around 1 billion euros, up from about 700 million euros previously. Then, in January 2025, Reuters reported that Adidas had finished 2024 with operating profit of 1.337 billion euros and full-year revenue of 23.683 billion euros. A dramatic rebound from the damage of 2023. That does not mean the Yeezy crisis vanished. It means Adidas managed to outrun it. The company also used 2024 to close the final chapters of the saga. In October 2024, Adidas said it had reached an out-of-court settlement with Yeezy, with no money changing hands and both sides dropping claims. Then, by the end of 2024, Adidas sold its last remaining pair of Yeezy sneakers. When management later said there was not one Yeezy shoe left, that was not just a logistics update. It was symbolic. The company had finally cleared the thing that nearly trapped it. But the lasting lesson is bigger than Adidas. The Yeezy episode showed how a partnership that looks like a masterstroke can quietly become a structural vulnerability. It also showed the difference between growth and resilience. Growth is what Yeezy gave Adidas. Resilience is what Adidas had to build after Yeezy was gone. The turnaround did not come from replacing one celebrity lightning strike with another. It came from better inventory control, stronger wholesale execution, faster decisions, sharper product focus, and a return to franchises the brand itself fully owned. And that is why this story works so well as a business documentary. On the surface, it is about sneakers, controversy, and a billionaire brand nearly imploding. Underneath, it is about strategy. Adidas learned the hard way that the most dangerous deals are often the ones that work too well for too long. Because once a company starts believing one partnership is irreplaceable, it stops preparing for the day that partnership disappears. And when that day comes, the bill is always bigger than anyone wants to admit. Adidas survived this one. But not every iconic brand gets out in time. Because sometimes the deal that looks like a comeback story in the beginning becomes the mistake that haunts a company for years. And if you want to see another global giant make one massive decision that changed everything, the next story is waiting.